Close up, what a new president means for Iowa, how the new administration could work with our state leaders, and the friendly face some Iowa farmers are glad to see back in the cabinet. Plus, where to turn if you're facing a mental health crisis, the free resource that's available to Iowans. Close Up starts right now.
This is Iowa's news leader. This is KCCI 8 News Close Up.
Good morning and thank you for joining us. I'm Scott Carpenter. This past week, history was made in Washington, D.C. Millions watched from around the world as Joe Biden was sworn in as the 46th president of the United States. Biden says he hopes to be ushering in a time of unity. Making history was Kamala Harris, who became the first female, first black, and first South Asian to hold the position of vice president. So how could this new administration impact Iowa? KCCI's Cynthia Fodor spoke with members of both sides of the aisle to get their reaction. We first hear from Democrat State Representative Bruce Hunter, who is a longtime friend of the new president.
You know, a lot of people are questioning what a Biden administration will mean for Iowa. What do you think?
Well, I think what it does is gives us the hope, and not a guarantee, but a hope of coming together as a state and as a country. And I think that's the most important thing that a Joe Biden administration can do. Coming together, we can address so many issues, whether it be the pandemic, whether it be racial justice, whether it be the divide that's happening right now between the left and the right. And I think Joe Biden is the guy to give us hope that can be accomplished.
So we have a Republican administration here in the state, and the governor and the President Trump were fairly close, seemingly. How do you think that will change things now? Will we still have will Iowa still have a friend in the White House?
Well, I think so. I think Joe Biden will be a friend to all Americans, whether you be a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, black, white, brown, yellow, whatever. Joe Biden is going to be president for all Americans. And I hope that when President Biden reaches out to Governor Reynolds with that message, that she'll reach out back to him with a similar message that we can and should all work together to achieve our common goals.
And Bruce, you've known him for a long time. Since how far back do you go?
Oh, I've known Joe 18 years, 17, 18 years or so. And what you saw today is true Joe Biden. He is a man that exudes humanity, and he will do what it takes to I think to at least get the motion going to bring this country back together. And I think if anybody can do it, Joe can do it.
Do you think, I mean, he has been in Washington a long time, but he has also said that he understands the issues of everyday Americans, everyday Iowans. Do you think he does?
Well, absolutely, because he's lived it. He's been in Washington for 45 years. However, while he was in the Senate, he took the train back home to Delaware every day. So he lived with the people of Delaware. He's been out traveling, especially in the last couple of years, talking with people, listening to their concerns, making sure that they know that they have a voice in Washington with Joe Biden. So yeah, I think he understands the trials and the concerns of people across America, and his cabinet that he's selected represents that also. I think it's the most diverse cabinet that we've ever seen in history. And I think that is representative of America. And I think with that cabinet and knowing Joe Biden, that, yeah, he understands what's going on in America right now.
And you think he understands Iowans? He spent a lot of time here, too.
Absolutely. He loves Iowa. He loves Iowans. He will address the concerns, whether it be urban, rural, farm, what's going on with the pandemic. He will take Iowa into deep contemplation and try to come up with solutions to problems that are plaguing Iowa right now. And more importantly, even listening to people about those concerns and trying to form solutions by those communications.
So what do Iowa Republicans think about this new administration? Cynthia continues her conversation with GOP strategist Eric Wolfson.
Well, Eric, a lot of people are wondering what impact this will have, having a new administration in Washington, given that Governor Reynolds had seemingly such a close relationship with President Trump. Do you think Iowans will still have a friend in the White House?
I think Iowans will not only have a friend in the White House, they'll have a friend throughout the administration. Obviously, Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack, our former governor, is going to be looking out for Iowa. Pete Buttigieg, who's a new incoming transportation secretary, he won the Iowa caucuses, so he has obviously a soft spot in his heart for Iowa. The vice president, she campaigned here running for president, and Joe Biden's relationship with Iowa, frankly, goes back to the 1980s. He ran for president, had a short run for president in 1987, but he ran again in 2008. Obviously, 2 terms as vice president. He was in Iowa quite a bit. And so you've got a lot of folks in that administration that know Iowa, know a lot of people in Iowa. So although maybe the players change a little bit, I think the relationships stay the same. I would expect, frankly, that Congresswoman Axne's stature will be raised a bit as the only Democrat in our delegation. But again, Joe Biden, having been a veteran of the Senate and knowing Chuck Grassley well, they served on the Judiciary Committee together. They're friends, and I think there are just a lot of relationships that are going to benefit the state of Iowa.
So there was some concern that, the governor would pick up the phone and speak to President Trump, and we got a lot of help with federal dollars coming our way after the derecho and the floods and things like that. Do you see any change?
I don't see any change because, for starters, I think President Biden is going to be somebody who's looking out for all 50 states. He's talked about being a unifier, and he's not somebody that holds pointless grudges. I don't think he has any reason to have any grudges with Iowa in the first place. But it may not always be the governor now that is picking up the phone and calling the White House. But we're going to have people in Iowa that have those relationships that are going to be able to get things done.
And you tell me your relationship with the president.
I worked for the president back in the late 80s during his first presidential run. It's an interesting combination because I've always been a Republican, and yet I worked for that presidential bid. He's somebody that I found to be exceedingly loyal, very loyal to the people he knows, very gracious, focused on obviously policy and results. I think as we look at this election, we look at the fact of what it means to the country in terms of a peaceful transition of power. It's a situation where if Republicans and independents and frankly even Democrats don't like what they see from this administration, for the next 2 years, we have midterm elections and they can always change that. But I think today is a day where we all want to give the president, the new president and the new administration an opportunity to show what they have in mind and what they can do. And
the one thing the chair of the Republican Party in Iowa had mentioned to me a while ago, that if Joe Biden became elected, he might not be a major advocate of keeping our first in the nation status. Any thoughts on that?
I think we're still a ways away. I think I feel on the Republican side safe that we're still going to be first in the nation for the Republicans. I know there's been a push within the Democratic Party itself to get rid of caucuses. They're not big fans of the caucus process, but we've survived a lot of other challenges before. I would suspect that Tom Vilsack and Pete Buttigieg might be two people that are going to be telling President Biden that we need to keep the Iowa caucuses first. We'll have to see how that goes. But, I think there are going to be plenty of advocates. Joe Biden has friends in Iowa from 35, 40 years ago who are big advocates of the Iowa caucuses and the first in the nation status. And I think, we just have to wait and see. But I think a case can be made to keep us where we are in line.
Up next, what does Iowa's agriculture community think about President Biden? Hear why some are hopeful about a friendly face that could be returning to the White House.
Every weeknight, we show you the important moments.
Welcome back to KCCI 8 News Close Up. Former President Trump had strong support from Iowa farmers, so are they nervous about a Biden administration? KCCI's Cynthia Fodor spoke with Aaron Putzi, the Senior Director of Information and Education for the Iowa Soybean Association.
I know it's a broad question, but what do you think the Biden administration will mean for Iowa farmers?
As it is with every inauguration, there's always a get-to-know time, and that's the time we're in right now. We know that as we look to the future, there are issues very important for every administration to consider as it relates to soybeans and agriculture. Top of the list will be renewable fuels, also trade, very important as well as making sure that rules and policies are fair, sensible, and reasonable for farmers and for agriculture.
And do you feel like the new president has an understanding of this state, having been here and spent time with Iowa farmers?
Given his years of public service and his travels around the country and the variety of roles that he has served, both as a senator as well as a vice president, it stands to reason that a Biden administration will be knowledgeable and up to speed on the agricultural issues of the day. We also know that there has been an interest in Vilsack, Iowa's former governor, returning to the role of USDA secretary. So that's important too, and something we're monitoring very close. So we all know, given his roots and his experience, a Secretary Vilsack would also be someone that could step right into that role and begin to serve very quickly.
And knowing that he is there, if confirmed, you will have an ear in Washington, do you believe?
That's always the case, I believe. I think, Iowa is well represented at the federal level, and they bring that experience with them. They bring that knowledge and understanding and some real world practicality. It's one thing to to talk about agriculture. It's another thing to understand agriculture and the issues that matter to farmers. So again, regardless of the administration, we feel confident about our ability to engage in the issues and to have people in Washington, D.C. representing the interests of the Iowa soybean farmer.
Now, a lot of farmers stuck with President Trump through thick and thin. How would you gauge how they're feeling now, just watching this change?
Well, there were a lot of issues that the administration had to manage over the last 4 years. Some of them were well publicized. The trade relations, one of those, we saw victories, we saw successes there, we saw some setbacks. USMCA was very good for agriculture. The passage of that, Mexico and Canada are two of our largest and most significant trading partners. Then we also had the friction with China, which is the world's #1 importer of soybeans and one of the largest, agricultural consumer on the face of the planet. So you put those two together then with issues around renewables, where things were a little bit scratchier than maybe we in agriculture would like them to be. So as we look to the new administration, can we continue on that path of strong relations with our trading partners while also ensuring a bright and prosperous future on the renewables and on the biodiesel front?
Cynthia wraps up her conversation with the Iowa Soybean Association after the break.
If you want the job done right the first time,
welcome back to KCCI 8 News Close Up. KCCI's Cynthia Fodor wraps up her conversation with Aaron Putzi, the Senior Director of Information and Education for the Iowa Soybean Association.
And of course, I was going to ask you if farmers are optimistic, but farmers are always optimistic.
You have to be optimistic to be a farmer, and you always have to, you're managing the present, which can sometimes be difficult. Look at the year we had, the year that's passed with, the trade friction, issues on the biofuels, renewable fuels front, We didn't have a whole lot of cooperation from Mother Nature with drought affecting most parts of Iowa, a derecho that slammed Iowa on August 10th. You put all of that together, the loss of grain storage just literally weeks before heading into a harvest season. So there was a lot to deal with. And unless you look to the future and say, you know, it's got to be better, those times can really bring you down. And it was a tough year. It's been a tough 7 years, you know, for agriculture. We've seen a recent uptick here. Last 3 or 4 months, we've seen a strengthening prices, maybe not across the board, but in the grain and in some protein sectors, we've seen an improvement. And I think that's what Bayou's farmers, that's what carries them into the new growing season that will be here before we know it.
I believe we're also going to see a new EPA administrator. And are you hopeful that that may help as well?
You know, on the EPA side, it's a critical agency on the renewables front. And that is one of the hiccups I think we saw in one of the areas where, as we look to the future, I think there's some promise and some opportunity. How can we make sure that we uphold the intent, the language of the renewable fuel standard, you know, as it relates to the production and the demand that can be there for homegrown energy? That's a very important part of agriculture today. Certainly on the biodiesel side, the value of the oil of the soybean used in biodiesel is growing exponentially. And when you increase the value of the oil that can be used in products like biodiesel, you then also affect the cost of the soybean meal or the protein side of the soybean, and you do it in a way that's beneficial to livestock farmers. So there's a win-win-win there, a win for the environment, a win for soybean farmers, a win for poultry, pork, dairy producers. I think the EPA can play a big role and make the future a brighter one on the renewable fuels front.
Mental health in Iowa, the free resource that's available if you are in crisis. That's next on Close Up.
Weeknights at 9.
Get your first look at the night.
Welcome back. KCCI's Cynthia Fodor tells us about an important resource called Your Life Iowa.
Okay, you're with Foundation 2 Crisis Services, which assists the state with a new website called Your Life Iowa. If someone never heard of this, what sort of information can they find there, and why is this a good place to turn?
Well, so I think what's really important is it's Your Life Iowa is the website, but it's also the statewide crisis line. So if you were to go to the Your Life Iowa website, you'll see a link to call, text, or chat our crisis center so that you can speak 24/7, 365 with the crisis counselor who can provide counseling on the phone and connect you with resources for mental health related crisis, behavioral health related crisis, questions around substance use and gambling, really everything under that mental health spectrum.
And walk us through how this website works. It really is broken down in all those areas to get you the specific kind of help that you need.
Yeah, so if you go to Your Life Iowa, the Your Life Iowa website, probably the most important thing is right there at the top of the screen. You see the phone number to call and speak with a counselor. And then under that, how to text and chat. There are also kind of various categories of mental health related and behavioral health related fields that you can click on and get some information on, as well as a live chat feature. The most used feature on the website is the ability to call from anywhere in the state and speak with a trained crisis counselor.
And is that something anyone can call and remain anonymous, and even someone experiencing depression or anxiety, is that a good place for them to start?
Absolutely. You can call the line. It is free. It is 24/7. It is a confidential and private conversation that you are having with a crisis counselor. We get calls, hundreds of calls every day. Our crisis center from all of our lines, takes about 50,000 phone calls a year from people who are experiencing mental health struggles, ranging from anxiety and depression to thoughts of suicide, to parenting issues and issues related to substance use. So we are here for you, and there isn't a wrong reason to call if you want to speak with a counselor.
And you said 50,000 a year. That's a lot. Has it increased with the pandemic?
So our numbers have increased. And that's 50,000 from all the lines that come into our crisis center. We also answer the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So all of our calls together is about 50,000 a year. The number of calls we have gotten on the Your Life Iowa line has increased throughout the pandemic, and especially over the summer and into the fall, as we saw the economic crisis become more impactful on the everyday lives of Iowans. We've definitely had an increase in call volume.
And aside from just talking to a counselor, I know a lot of people that have just wanted to find someone to talk to, but they don't even know where to start, and who is finding the right therapist for them is important. Can this hotline help lead them to that right person, the right therapist?
Absolutely. Resources are something we give out on a lot of calls. We help people, whether that's a therapist or a substance abuse treatment facility, or basic needs, connecting someone with a food pantry or something like that. All of those are good reasons to call the crisis line, and we're happy to help an individual connect with what they need in their community, based on what they identify as their needs.
And can someone reach out on behalf of a loved one?
Absolutely, that's a great question. Yes, you can call on behalf of somebody. You can call and just ask questions anonymously about someone. It could be a friend, it could be a family member. We will do our best to walk you through that and support you in whatever way the individual needs.
Thanks for watching. See you next week.